The call came from a number that shouldn't exist. Lee Min-jae stared at the screen on his encrypted phone, the one that had been silent for 2 years. The one only 3 people in the world had access to. 2 of them were dead. The third was a woman who disappeared like smoke. He answered without speaking. That was the protocol. What came through wasn't a voice. It was humming. A child, singing off-key, the melody fractured by wet hiccups. A lullaby he knew. One he used to pretend he didn't hear when she thought he was asleep. Then breathing. Small, fast breathing. Hello? Min-jae's voice came out sharper than intended. Silence. But not empty silence. The kind with someone on the other end. Listening. Mommy fall down. 3 words. A toddler's voice. Thin as paper. Min-jae's hand tightened around the phone. Where is your mother? On floor. Won't wake up. Behind the small voice, another child was crying. Not screaming. Just a rhythmic, broken sobbing that sounded like it had been going on for a while. Are you alone? Uh-huh. How many of you? 2. A pause. Then, simpler. Me, Clara. The crying got louder, closer to the phone. Then a new voice, younger, rawer. Mommy! Mommy sleeping! Min-jae stood. His chair skidded backward across marble. Outside his office window, the city stretched out like a grid of light and shadow, oblivious. Inside, something ancient and violent was waking up. What's your name? Mara. The air left his lungs. Mara. The name of his mother. The phone was still in her hand. He could hear it. The slight rustle of movement. A toddler breathing. He didn't ask more questions. There was no point. He just said one thing. Stay there. I'm coming. Okay. So small. The line went dead. If you're already feeling the pull of this story, the kind that wraps around your chest and doesn't let go, subscribe to Velvet Noir. We tell the stories that leave marks. Stay with us. Min-jae didn't run. He never ran. But what he did in the next 11 minutes would break every rule he'd built his life on. He deployed helicopters, sent convoys, tore through the city's veins like something hemorrhaging. The glazier, the man known for moving in silence, made so much noise that every rival, every ghost, every enemy with ears heard it. They followed the sound. When he kicked in the yellow door of the cottage 3 hours north, the frame splintered like kindling. The house smelled like lavender and rain and something sharp beneath it, fear, sweat, the metallic tang of a body in distress. There were blocks scattered on the floor. A sippy cup knocked over, milk seeping into the rug, and on the living room floor, a woman, dark skin, natural hair fanned out like a crown, unconscious but breathing, shallow and thin. Stacy Woods, the only person who'd ever walked away from him and lived. But Min-jae didn't look at her first. He looked at the 2 small figures huddled beside the couch, toddlers, maybe 2 years old, maybe just past. They had wet faces, puffy from crying, big, dark eyes ringed with exhaustion, curly hair and lopsided pigtails that were half undone. They were holding hands, and when they looked up at him, he stopped breathing. Not because they looked like him, not exactly, but because of the way they watched. Still, wary, the kind of stillness prey learns when a predator enters the room. One of them, the one clutching a phone in her small fist, didn't move. The other one, Clara, took a shaky step forward. She stared at his face. Then she lifted one hand, fingers sticky with something juice. Tears. He didn't know, and touched his cheek. Testing. Verifying. She turned to her sister. Same, she whispered. Min-jae's throat closed. Mara was still holding the phone. She held it out to him like an offering. On the screen, he saw it. A contact labeled with a single red circle emoji. No name, no number visible. Just a button a child could recognize. Press the red button. That's all she would have needed to teach them. Point, press, wait. By the door, he saw the go bag, packed, ready. Stacy had been planning to run. Again. But she'd also done something else. She'd programmed her daughters, 2-year-olds who could barely string sentences together to call him. Not the police. Not a neighbor. Not 911. Him. She had weaponized his need to protect what was his. She had turned her children into a failsafe, a trigger she could pull even while unconscious, because she knew, had always known, that the most dangerous thing in her world wasn't being alone, or broke, or dying on a floor, while her babies watched. It was him, and she'd just handed him the 2 things that would make him burn the world down. The twins were asleep in the back of the car, tucked into blankets that smelled like clinical safety, when Min-jae's head of security leaned close. We have a problem, Handle it. You made noise tonight, sir. A lot of it. The entire network knows you broke protocol. They know you panicked. A pause. And they followed the helicopters. Min Jae's jaw tightened. Followed them where? To the cottage. They know about the woman now. They know about the children. And they know you care. The words hung in the air like a noose tightening. In the rearview mirror, Min Jae could see two small faces, slack with exhausted sleep. Mara's fist was curled around a stuffed rabbit. Clara's thumb was in her mouth, fragile, breakable. Stacy hadn't just used him as a failsafe. She'd made him visible. And in his world, visibility was a death sentence. But here's what she hadn't counted on. Min Jae wasn't the same man she'd left 2 years ago. That man would have walked away, cut his losses, burned the bridge to save the empire. This man, the one who'd heard his mother's name in a toddler's frightened voice, who'd kicked down a door and found his own eyes staring back at him from two small faces, was already planning who to kill first. Stacy had tried to erase him. Instead, she'd just created the thing she feared most. A monster with something to lose. The ambulance met them at the private airfield. Min Jae had called ahead his doctor, his clinic, the kind of facility that didn't ask questions and didn't keep records the government could access. Stacy was still unconscious when they loaded her onto the gurney, her body small and fragile under the white sheet. The paramedic rattled off numbers Min Jae didn't understand. Blood pressure, heart rate, oxygen saturation. All of them were wrong. Mara and Clara sat in the back of the second car, strapped into car seats that Min Jae's security had procured from somewhere. They didn't cry. They just watched everything with those dark, solemn eyes. When Min Jae leaned in to check on them, Clara reached for him, not for comfort, just reaching, like she was still verifying he was real. He let her grab his finger. Her hand was so small his entire chest hurt. The clinic was glass and steel and silence, a fortress disguised as a hospital. Min Jae's doctor, a woman named Doctor, An, who'd stitched him up more times than he could count, met them in the private wing. She looked at Stacy, then at the twins, then at Min Jae. Severe anemia, she said, pulling him aside. Possibly chronic. Her iron levels are catastrophic. Her hemoglobin is barely half of normal. She's been running on fumes for months, maybe longer. It's a miracle she didn't collapse sooner. Will she recover? With blood transfusions, iron infusions, and serious rest, yes. But this will take time, weeks, not days. And Min Jae, doctor. An's voice dropped. This didn't happen overnight. She's been sick for a while, and she's been alone. Alone. The word stuck in his throat like glass. They set the twins up in a room next to Stacy's. Someone had found stuffed animals, a nightlight shaped like a moon, blankets soft enough for children who'd spent the night watching their mother unconscious on the floor. Mara climbed into one bed. Clara crawled into the other. Neither of them asked for their mother. They just curled up, facing each other across the space between the beds, and closed their eyes. Min Jae stood in the doorway and watched them fall asleep. He didn't know how to be in a room with children. Didn't know what to say, what to do, whether to leave or stay. But he stayed anyway, his back against the wall, until their breathing evened out and the room settled into something like peace. That's when his head of security found him. We have a problem. Min Jae didn't move. I know. Do you? The man Cho, his name was Cho, stepped closer, his voice barely a whisper. Because the entire syndicate is talking. They're asking why the Glacier deployed a helicopter strike team to the middle of nowhere. Why you moved like the world was ending. They followed the noise, Min Jae. Straight to that cottage. How many? At least 3 factions. Maybe more. Min Jae's jaw tightened. Did they see her? They saw enough. A woman. Children. They know you broke protocol for something personal. And now they're asking what you're hiding. The silence stretched between them like a wire about to snap. Get me a list, Min Jae said finally. Everyone who followed. Everyone who saw. Everyone who knows. Cho's face went carefully blank. What are you going to do? What I should have done 2 years ago. Min Jae turned and looked through the window at the 2 small figures asleep in the beds. I'm going to make sure no one ever asks again. 10 days later, Stacy was strong enough to sit up without the room spinning. The transfusions had brought color back to her skin, but her body still felt foreign to her, weak, uncooperative, a structure that had nearly collapsed and was only now remembering how to bear weight. Min Jae was there when she woke each morning. Not at her bedside with flowers or apologies. Just there, in the chair by the window, reading reports or watching the city wake up, a constant presence she couldn't escape and wasn't sure she wanted to. The twins visited twice a day, supervised by nurses who'd learned to anticipate their needs. They brought drawings, sticky hands, questions Stacy couldn't always answer. And each time they left, she watched Min-jae watch them go, his face unreadable but his attention absolute. On the 10th night, when the clinic had settled into the quiet hum of machines and distant footsteps, Min-jae finally spoke. "I found something," he said. "In your go bag." Stacy went very still. He pulled 2 pieces of paper from his jacket. Birth certificates. He laid them on the bed beside her hand with the careful precision of someone handling evidence. "Mara Jiho Woods," he read aloud. "Clara Mara Woods, father unknown." Stacy's face didn't change, but her fingers curled into the sheets. "Jiho," Min-jae continued, his voice soft and lethal. "My father's name, and Mara." He stopped. The air in the room shifted. "You gave one of them my mother's name as her first name, and you gave the other my mother's name as her middle name." Her throat moved. A swallow, nothing more. "You erased me from the paperwork, Stacy, but you carved my family into their identities. My mother, my father, both of them woven into my daughter's names like a message I was never supposed to read. They deserve to know where they came from," Stacy said finally, her voice steady even as her hands shook. "Even if I couldn't let them know you." "Couldn't or wouldn't?" "Both." Min-jae stood, walked to the window. Outside, the city was a grid of light and shadow, indifferent to the reckoning happening in this sterile room. "I had them tested," he said, not looking at her. "DNA. The results came back 3 days ago." He heard her breath catch. "Just once. They're mine." "I know. You've known for 2 years." "Yes, and you didn't tell me." "No." He turned, looked at her. "Why?" Stacy met his eyes, and for the first time since she'd woken up in his clinic, something cracked in her armor. "Because I loved you," she said. "And I knew that if I stayed, you'd love me back. And if you loved me, you'd never let me go. And if you never let me go, I'd disappear. Not my body. Myself. I'd become a secret you kept in a glass house, and I'd spend the rest of my life watching you through walls." The truth of it hung between them like smoke. "You were right," Min-jae said quietly. "I would have kept you. I would have hidden you. I would have built a fortress and put you inside it and called it love. I know. But that was 2 years ago." He moved closer, his voice dropping to something that wasn't quite a threat and wasn't quite a promise. "I'm not that man anymore." "Then who are you?" Min-jae looked at her, this woman who'd run from him, who'd weaponized his own instincts against him, who'd just admitted she'd loved him while stabbing him in the back and felt something shift in his chest. "I don't know yet," he said. "But I'm about to find out." 2 weeks after the collapse, Stacy was finally strong enough to walk more than a few steps without her vision graying at the edges. Dr. An had cleared her for discharge with conditions: strict iron supplementation, high-protein meals, no physical exertion, and absolutely no stress. Min-jae had almost laughed at that last one. The twins had adapted with the terrifying resilience of toddlers. They ate the food Min-jae's staff brought them. They played with the toys someone had procured: wooden blocks, soft dolls, picture books with bright colors. They asked for their mother in the mornings and seemed satisfied when told she was resting or getting stronger. They didn't ask about home, didn't ask to leave, just existed in this strange new world with the acceptance of children who'd learned early that the ground beneath them could shift without warning. When Stacy finally walked into their room, Clara burst into tears. Not sad tears, relief tears. She ran to her mother and wrapped her arms around Stacy's legs and sobbed into her knees. Mara was quieter. She just walked over, leaned against Stacy's side, and held on. Stacy sank to the floor and pulled them both into her lap, and Min-jae watched from the doorway as she whispered things he couldn't hear. Promises, probably. Reassurances. The kind of lies mothers tell their children to keep the fear at bay. When she finally looked up at him, her face was wet but her eyes were dry. "We're leaving," she said. "No, you can't keep us here. I'm not keeping you. I'm protecting you." Stacy stood, carefully, keeping the twins close. "From what?" "From what I did to get to you." She went still. "What does that mean?" Min-jae stepped into the room and closed the door. "It means when your daughters called me, I didn't think, I didn't plan, I just moved. Helicopters, Stacy, convoys. I tore through this city like it was on fire, and people noticed." "What people?" "The kind who've been waiting for me to show weakness." He watched her face, saw the understanding dawn. I made noise. They followed the sound. And now they know about you, about them. The color drained from Stacy's face. You led them to us. Yes. You, her voice cracked. You made us targets. I made us targets, Min-jae corrected. But I'm going to fix it. How? By making sure everyone who followed me that night understands what happens when they threaten what's mine. Stacy's laugh was bitter, broken. We're not yours. You made us mine the second you programmed that phone. Min-jae moved closer, his voice dropping. You didn't call me because you loved me. You didn't call me because you missed me. You called me because I'm the most dangerous thing you know. You wanted that danger between your daughters and the world. Well, congratulations, Stacy. You got it. She stared at him, and for a long moment, the only sound was Clara's hiccuping breathing. I can't stay here, Stacy whispered. You can't leave. Then what do you want from me? Min-jae looked at her, at this woman who'd outsmarted him, outmaneuvered him, and somehow still ended up exactly where he wanted her, and told her the truth. I want you to stop running, he said. I want you to let me protect you. And I want you to understand that the man you left 2 years ago, he would have locked you in a tower and called it love. But the man standing in front of you now has spent 2 years learning what it means to lose something that matters. So I'm not asking you to trust me. I'm asking you to make a deal with me. What kind of deal? You stay. You let me keep you safe. And when this is over, when the threats are gone and the danger has passed, you get to choose. Stay or go. No cages. No glass houses. Just a choice. Stacy's eyes searched his face. And if I choose to go, then I let you. I don't believe you. I know, Min-jae said, but you're going to have to decide whether you believe me enough to bet your daughters' lives on it. The cruelty of the statement hung in the air, but it was also the truth, and they both knew it. Stacy looked down at Mara and Clara, then back at Min-jae. How long? She asked. Until it's safe. That's not an answer. It's the only one I have. She closed her eyes, breathed. When she opened them again, something had shifted. The architect was back, the strategist. Fine, she said, but I have conditions. Min-jae almost smiled. Of course you do. The house sat on the coast like a shard of ice, 3 stories of steel and glass perched on a cliff, the ocean stretching out below it in endless gray. Min-jae's safe house. He'd bought it years ago as a contingency plan, somewhere he could disappear if the world came for him. He'd never imagined bringing anyone here, let alone a woman and 2 toddlers who didn't understand why they couldn't go home. The first night was chaos. Clara cried because the rooms were too big. Mara refused to eat because the food was wrong. Stacy moved through the space like a caged animal, her eyes constantly tracking exits, windows, distances. Min-jae's security team stayed out of sight, but their presence was everywhere. Cameras, motion sensors, the faint electronic hum of a perimeter that never slept. By the second night, Stacy cornered him in the kitchen. This is a prison, she said. It's a fortress. What's the difference? Min-jae set down his coffee. One keeps you safe, the other keeps you captive. And which one is this? He looked at her, at the exhaustion in her face, the defiance still burning in her eyes, and felt something in him crack. I don't know yet, he admitted, but I'm trying to make it the first one. Try harder. She turned to leave, but Min-jae caught her wrist. Not hard, just enough to stop her. I didn't want this, he said quietly. Any of this. I didn't want to be the reason you're trapped here. I didn't want to be the danger you have to protect them from, but I am, and you made me this way when you programmed that phone. Stacy pulled her hand free. Don't you dare blame me for your choices. I'm not blaming you. I'm telling you that we're both in this now. You wanted me to be a weapon. Fine, I'm a weapon. But weapons don't get to choose who they cut. The silence stretched between them, taut and brittle. How long? Stacy asked again. I don't know. That's not good enough. It's all I have. She stared at him for a long moment, then walked away without another word. The next morning, Min-jae found Mara in the living room, standing at the floor-to-ceiling window that overlooked the ocean. She was so small against all that glass, her breath fogging the surface in small, rhythmic clouds. He didn't know how to talk to children, didn't know what to say or how to say it. But he walked over and crouched down beside her anyway. Big water, Mara said, not looking at him. Ocean, Min-jae corrected gently. Ocean. She tested the word. Where mommy? Sleeping. Always sleeping. The observation hit harder than it should have. Min-jae studied her profile, the slope of her nose, the set of her jaw, the way her eyes tracked the movement of the waves. His father's eyes. His mother's determination. "She's getting better," he said. Mara didn't respond, just kept watching the water. After a moment, she reached out and put her small hand on the glass. Min-jae watched as she pressed her palm against the window, leaving a tiny print in the fog of her breath. "Trapped," she said. The word was a knife. "What?" "Fish," Mara said, and pointed down to where the waves crashed against the rocks. "In bowl. Trapped." Min-jae looked at her, and something in his chest twisted. She was 2 years old. She shouldn't understand metaphors. Shouldn't understand the weight of what she was saying. But she did. "Not trapped," he said, even though it felt like a lie. "Safe." Mara turned to look at him, and her expression was so old, so knowing, that for a moment Min-jae forgot how to breathe. "Same thing," she said. That night, Stacy put the girls to bed in the room Min-jae had set up for them. Twin beds with soft sheets and nightlights that projected stars on the ceiling. Clara fell asleep almost immediately, exhausted from crying. But Mara stayed awake, her eyes tracking her mother's movements. Stacy sat on the edge of Mara's bed and brushed the curls back from her forehead. "Tell story," Mara whispered. "Which one?" "Glass Prince." Stacy's breath caught. She hadn't told that story in days, not since before the collapse. Before the phone call, before everything changed. "Once upon a time," she began, her voice soft, "there was a prince made of glass." Min-jae stood in the hallway, just out of sight, and listened. He lived in a tower so tall it touched the sky. Stacy continued. "And he built the walls so high and so thick that nothing could hurt him. Not fire, not arrows, not even the wind. He was safe, completely, perfectly safe. But he was alone," Mara whispered, finishing the line she'd heard 100 times. "Yes," Stacy said. "He was alone. And one day, he looked out his window and saw the sun, and he wanted to feel the warmth on his face. But when he tried to climb down from his tower, he realized something terrible. The walls too high. The walls were too high," Stacy confirmed. "He'd built them so well, so carefully, that he couldn't get out. So he sat in his tower, made of glass, and watched the world through walls he'd built himself. And then," Mara's voice was getting sleepy now, the edges soft. "And then," Stacy said, "he learned that sometimes the only way to see the sun is to break the glass." Min-jae's hands curled into fists. Stacy kissed Mara's forehead and stood, turning off the light. When she stepped into the hallway, she found Min-jae waiting. "She asked for that story," he said quietly. "She always asks for that story. You told them I was the prince. I told them you were trapped." Stacy's voice was careful, neutral. "That you built walls to keep yourself safe, and ended up building yourself a prison. I didn't demonize you, Min-jae. I just told them the truth." "And what is the truth?" She looked at him, and for the first time since she'd woken up in his clinic, something almost like pity crossed her face. "That you're more afraid of being hurt than you are of being alone," she said. "And that's the saddest thing I know." She walked past him, leaving him standing in the dark hallway, his reflection staring back at him from the glass walls of his fortress. A week passed, then 2. The house settled into a rhythm that felt less like a prison and more like a truce. Stacy cooked breakfast while Min-jae read reports in his office. The twins played in the safe room. Min-jae had set up soft mats, wooden blocks, books with bright pictures. His security team learned to make themselves invisible, and Stacy stopped flinching every time she saw a camera. But the distance between them remained. A careful, measured space neither of them tried to cross, until the night Min-jae heard the humming. He was in his office, reviewing security footage, when the sound drifted down the hallway. Soft, fragile, the same lullaby he'd heard on the phone 2 weeks ago. The one Stacy used to hum when she thought he was asleep, back when they shared a bed and a life and a future that didn't include walls. He followed the sound to the twins' room. The door was cracked open. Inside, Stacy sat on the floor between the 2 beds, her back against the wall, her eyes closed. She was humming. Not for the twins, they were both asleep. She was humming for herself. Min-jae stood in the doorway and watched her. The curve of her neck, the way her fingers drummed against her knee in time with the melody, the exhaustion carved into every line of her body. "I know you're there," she said without opening her eyes. He didn't move. "I didn't mean to. Doesn't matter." She opened her eyes and looked at him. "You were always good at watching." The accusation landed soft but sharp. "I'm sorry," Min-jae said, and he wasn't sure what he was apologizing for. For watching, For bringing her here. For the last 2 years. For all of it. For what? For making you feel like you had to be someone you weren't. Stacy blinked. Whatever she'd expected him to say, it wasn't that. I didn't know how to love you without hiding you, Min-jae continued. I thought if I kept you close enough, safe enough, secret enough, I could protect you from everything, including myself. You were right about one of those things. Which one? The last one. Stacy stood, careful not to wake the girls. She moved to the doorway, and Min-jae stepped back to give her space. You did need to protect me from you. Because the version of me that loved you? She was disappearing. Every day I stayed, I felt myself getting smaller. Not because you were cruel, because you were careful. And there's a kind of love that feels like being preserved under glass. I know, Min-jae said quietly. I know that now. Do you? I've had 2 years to figure it out. Stacy studied his face, searching for something. And what did you figure out? That loving someone doesn't mean keeping them. Min-jae's voice was rough, scraped raw. It means giving them room to breathe, even if it means watching them walk away. Is that why you said you'd let me go? When this is over? Yes. I still don't believe you. I know. They stood there in the hallway, close enough to touch, neither of them moving. What do you want from me, Min-jae? Stacy asked finally. The truth. Not the deal. Not the strategy. What do you actually want? He looked at her, this woman who'd loved him and left him, and somehow taught him more in her absence than he'd learned in a lifetime of proximity, and told her the truth. I want to be someone you don't have to run from, he said. I want to be someone our daughters don't have to mythologize in fairy tales. I want to be real. Not perfect. Not safe. Just real. Stacy's breath caught. That's the first honest thing you've ever said to me. Then it's a start. She turned to walk away, then stopped. Min-jae? Yes? The version of you that I left? The one who would have locked me in a tower? She looked back at him, and something in her eyes softened. He's not the one standing here. She left him in the hallway, but for the first time in 2 weeks, the space between them felt like something other than a battlefield. The alarm woke everyone at 2:33 inches the morning. Not the kind of alarm you sleep through. The kind that crawls into your bones and screams that something is wrong. 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 Min-jae was out of bed and armed in seconds. He moved through the dark house on instinct, his mind already running through protocols, exits, safe rooms. The security feed on his phone showed 4 figures on the perimeter, moving fast and coordinated. Professionals. He reached the twins' room and found Stacy already there, pulling both girls out of bed. They were crying, both of them loud and terrified, and not understanding why the world had turned into noise and light and fear. Safe room, Min-jae said. Now. Stacy didn't argue. She scooped Clara into her arms and grabbed Mara's hand, moving toward the panic room Min-jae had shown her the first day. But Mara pulled back, reaching for Min-jae, her face streaked with tears. Monster! She cried. Monster, come! For half a heartbeat, Min-jae froze. Then he crouched down and let Mara crash into his chest, her small arms wrapping around his neck. I'm here, he said. I'm here. But you have to go with Mommy now, okay? I have to keep the wolves away. No! Mara's grip tightened. Monster, stay! Stacy's voice cut through the chaos. Mara, baby, we have to. Trust me, Min-jae said, looking at Stacy over Mara's head. Please, just this once. Trust me. The moment stretched between them, suspended on a wire. Then Stacy nodded. Min-jae peeled Mara's arms from his neck and handed her to Stacy, who took both girls and ran for the safe room. The heavy door closed behind them with a hydraulic hiss, and Min-jae was alone in the hallway. He checked his phone. The 4 figures had breached the perimeter. They were inside the outer fence now, moving toward the house. Min-jae walked to the living room, the one with the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the ocean and stood in the center of all that glass. Then he turned on the lights. Cho found him standing at the window, silhouetted against the night. Sir, you need to move. Now. How many? Min-jae asked calmly. 4 confirmed. Maybe more. Which faction? Jung's crew. The ones who followed the helicopters. Min-jae's jaw tightened. Jung. A rival who'd been testing his boundaries for years, looking for weaknesses, waiting for an opportunity. How close? 50 meters and closing. Good. Min-jae turned to face his security chief. Let them get to 40. Cho's face went carefully blank. Sir, you heard me. Let them think they've got a shot. Let them think I'm exposed. They'll light this place up. That's what I'm counting on. Understanding dawned on Cho's face, followed immediately by horror. You're using yourself as bait. I'm using myself as a message. Min-jae walked to the window and pressed his hand against the glass, the same way Mara had days ago. I need them to understand what happens when they come for what's mine, and the only language they understand is violence. This is insane. No, Min-jae said quietly. This is necessary. He watched his reflection in the glass, the monster Mara had named him, the prince Stacy had trapped in her fairy tale, the man he was trying to become, and for the first time in his life, Min-jae let himself be seen. The first shot shattered the window at 247A. Glass exploded inward like frozen rain. Min-jae moved before the sound registered, his body remembering the violence it had learned long before his mind could catch up. He rolled left as the second shot punched through the space where his head had been, the bullet embedding itself in the wall behind him with a dull thunk. 4 figures poured through the broken window. Professionals, tactical gear, suppressed weapons, movements synchronized like a surgical team. Jung had sent his best. Min-jae didn't give them time to spread out. The first man cleared the window frame, and Min-jae was on him, driving his elbow into the soft junction of jaw and throat. The crack was audible, even over the alarm. The man went down gurgling, and Min-jae had his weapon before the body hit the floor. 2 shots. Center mass. The second man dropped. The third and fourth split, one diving behind the couch, the other moving toward the hallway where Stacy and the twins were hidden behind 3 feet of reinforced steel. Min-jae couldn't let him reach that door. He vaulted over the fallen man, using the momentum to drive his shoulder into the fourth attacker's spine. They crashed together into the wall. The man was faster than Min-jae expected, twisting with the impact, bringing his knee up toward Min-jae's ribs. The blow connected. Pain bloomed white and sharp, but Min-jae had spent years learning to function through pain. He caught the man's leg, torqued his body sideways, and felt the knee dislocate with a pop that sounded like a knuckle cracking. The scream that followed was brief. Min-jae's hand found the man's throat and squeezed until the screaming stopped. The third man rose from behind the couch, weapon raised. Min-jae threw the knife he'd pulled from the fourth man's tactical vest. It wasn't elegant, wasn't precise, but it buried itself in the man's shoulder deep enough to make him drop the gun. He stumbled backward, and Min-jae closed the distance in 3 strides. Tell Jung, Min-jae said, his voice barely above a whisper as he pressed the man against the wall, that if he comes for my family again, I won't leave survivors to carry the message. He could hear Cho's team moving through the perimeter now, cleaning up the outer breach. The sirens in the distance were his doing. He'd triggered the police response himself, knowing that the spectacle of law enforcement would force Jung's team to scatter. Min-jae released the man and watched him stumble toward the broken window, clutching his bleeding shoulder. Let him run. Let him talk. Let the entire network know what happened when they threatened what was his. The house settled into quiet. 3 bodies. 1 survivor fleeing into the night, and Min-jae standing in the center of broken glass, blood on his hands that wasn't his own, breathing hard. He looked down. A wet warmth spread across his shoulder. One of the shots had grazed him after all, a shallow furrow that burned like fire but wouldn't kill. The safe room door opened. In the safe room, Stacy had counted every gunshot. 7. Then silence so complete she could hear her own heartbeat in her ears. She'd held both twins against her chest, one hand over each of their ears, whispering promises she didn't know if she could keep. Clara had buried her face in Stacy's neck, but Mara had twisted in her grip, trying to see, trying to understand what the monster was doing on the other side of that door. When the hydraulic lock finally disengaged, Stacy's breath stopped. Min-jae stood in the doorway, backlit by emergency lighting. His shirt was torn, dark with blood that looked black in the low light. There was a cut above his eye, already swelling. His hands were covered in blood, but he was standing, breathing, alive. Mara pushed free from Stacy's arms and ran to him. "Monster!" she cried, and Min-jae caught her before she hit his legs, scooping her up even though it clearly hurt. "I'm here," he said. "The wolves are gone. Gone forever?" Min-jae looked at Stacy over Mara's head, and something passed between them. An understanding. A shift. "Yes," he said. "Forever." Stacy stood, Clara still in her arms, and walked to the doorway. She looked at the blood on Min-jae's shirt, the exhaustion in his face, the way he held Mara like she was made of something more precious than glass. "You're hurt," she said. "I'm fine. That's not what fine looks like. Stacy, sit down before you fall down." It wasn't a request. Min-jae sat, 20 minutes later, Min-jae sat shirtless in the kitchen while Stacy's hands moved over the wound on his shoulder. The twins were asleep in her bed this time, their small bodies pressed together for comfort. The adrenaline had burned through them like wildfire, leaving only exhaustion in its wake. The bullet had grazed him a furrow 3 inches long that had laid open skin and muscle but missed bone. Dr. An was on her way, but for now, it was just them. The antiseptic, the silence, Stacy's fingers careful and clinical as she cleaned blood. That was his this time. "This is going to scar," she said, her voice neutral. "I have others. I know." Her hands paused. "I've seen them." The reference to their past to nights when she'd traced those scars with her fingertips, cataloging his history in silence, hung between them. "What happened out there?" she asked, resuming her work. "I sent a message." "What kind of message?" Min-jae looked at her. "The kind that ends conversations." Stacy's hand stilled. "You killed them. 3 of them. I let one live." "Why?" "Because dead men don't talk. I needed someone to go back and explain what happens when they threaten my family." The word landed in the space between them like a stone dropped in still water. Family. The ripples spread outward, touching everything. Stacy's jaw tightened. She pressed the antiseptic-soaked gauze harder than necessary. Min-jae didn't flinch. "We're not your family, Min-jae." "You are," he said quietly. "Whether you want to be or not. The moment you programmed that phone, the moment your daughters called me, the moment I saw their faces, we became a family, and I protect what's mine. That's the problem." Stacy's voice cracked, just slightly. "You keep saying mine like we're things you own, like we're territory you've claimed. Then tell me what word you want me to use." She looked at him, really looked at him, and he saw it in her eyes. The war between what she wanted and what she feared, between the man he'd been and the man he was becoming. "I don't know," she admitted. "Then we'll figure it out together." Stacy tied off the bandage with more force than necessary and stepped back, her hands trembling slightly now that the work was done. "You're impossible. You knew that when you left. And yet here I am." "Here you are," Min-jae agreed. They looked at each other across the kitchen, the twins asleep upstairs, the house settling back into its bones after violence. Outside, Cho's team was removing the bodies, replacing the windows, erasing evidence like they'd done 100 times before. By morning, there would be no trace of what had happened here, except for the scar on Min-jae's shoulder, except for the shift in how Stacy was looking at him. "Thank you," she said finally, "for keeping us safe." "Don't thank me," Min-jae said. "I'm the reason you needed protecting in the first place." "I know, but you're also the reason we're alive." "Stacy, don't." She held up a hand. "Don't apologize. Don't explain. Just let me say this. I see what you're trying to do. I see you trying to be different. And I don't know if it's enough. I don't know if it will ever be enough. But I see it." Min-jae nodded, his throat too tight for words. Stacy turned to leave, then paused in the doorway. "The glass prince," she said without turning around. "In the story. He doesn't break the glass himself. Someone has to do it for him. Someone who isn't afraid of the shards." "How does that happen?" Min-jae asked. Stacy looked back at him, and for the first time in 2 weeks, something almost like warmth touched her face. "I don't know yet. I haven't figured out the ending." Then she was gone, leaving Min-jae alone in the kitchen, with blood under his fingernails and the ghost of her touch still burning on his skin. The cleanup took 3 days. Bodies removed, windows replaced, blood scrubbed from floors until no trace remained. Min-jae's security team worked in silence, efficient and professional, and by the time they were done, the house looked exactly as it had before. But nothing was the same. Jung's remaining crew didn't retaliate. They didn't send threats or demands. They just disappeared, the way rats do when they realize the cat is awake. Word spread through the network. The glazier had drawn a line, and crossing it came with consequences that couldn't be undone. But Min-jae knew it wasn't enough. Lines could be tested. Boundaries could be pushed. As long as he remained a ghost in his own world, present but hidden, powerful but secret, there would always be someone looking for the crack in his armor. So he made a call. "I need you to set up a meeting," he told Cho, "with Detective Park." Cho went very still. "The police?" "Yes, sir, I know what it is." Detective Park was a name everyone in the network knew. Organized crime division, clean, incorruptible, and relentless. She'd been circling Min-jae's operations for years, looking for proof, for connections, for anything she could use to bring him down. "You're turning yourself in?" Cho asked. "No," Min-jae said. I'm giving her a gift. The meeting happened in a cafe downtown. Public. Visible. The kind of place where violence was impossible and secrets were harder to keep. Detective Park sat across from Min Jae, her face carefully neutral. She was in her 40s, sharp-eyed and sharper-minded, and she'd spent the last 5 years trying to prove Min Jae was more than just a legitimate businessman. "Mr. Lee," she said, "this is unexpected." "I'm sure it is." "You're here to confess?" "I'm here to make a trade." Park's eyes narrowed. "I don't make deals with criminals." "You do when the criminals give you something you want more than them." Min Jae slid a folder across the table. "Inside is everything you need to dismantle 3 of the biggest smuggling operations on the West Coast. Names, routes, warehouses, financials, everything." Park didn't touch the folder. "And what do you want in return?" "Nothing." "I don't believe you." "You should." Min Jae leaned back. "Those operations aren't mine. They're my competitors. The ones who came to my house. The ones who threatened my family. I'm burning them to the ground, and I'm using you to do it. So this is revenge. This is strategy." Min Jae's voice was flat, factual. "I can't operate in the shadows anymore. Not with a target on my back. Not with children in my house. So I'm stepping into the light. I'm giving you enough evidence to keep you busy for years, and in exchange, you're going to look the other way while I clean my own house. Why would I do that? Because if you don't, I'll disappear. And all those operations, they'll keep running. But if you take what I'm offering, you get to be the detective who took down the biggest trafficking ring in the Pacific Northwest. You get headlines, promotions, justice." Park stared at him. "And you get what?" "Time," Min Jae said, "and distance. Enough to figure out how to be something other than a ghost." Detective Park picked up the folder. Opened it. Her eyes scanned the first page, then the second, and with each line, her expression shifted from skepticism to shock to something almost like hunger. "This is real," she said. "Yes." "You're really giving me this?" "Yes." "Why?" Min Jae thought about Mara's hand on the glass, about Clara crying in the safe room, about Stacy humming in the dark, trying to hold herself together while the world came apart. "Because I have something to lose now," he said, "and I'm willing to burn everything else to keep it safe." Park closed the folder. "If I take this, you're making a lot of enemies." "I already have enemies. I'm just making sure they're too busy fighting each other to come for me." "And what about you? What happens when this information traces back to you?" "It won't." "How can you be sure?" "Because I'm very good at what I do, detective. And what I do is disappear." Park studied him for a long moment. Then she stood, the folder tucked under her arm. "I'll be watching you," she said. "I know. If you step out of line, you'll know where to find me." Park left without another word, and Min Jae sat alone in the cafe, watching the city move around him. He'd just set fire to his own world, cut ties, burned bridges, made himself visible in a way that would ripple through the network for years. But for the first time in his life, he didn't feel like he was losing something. He felt like he was finally making space. When he got back to the house, Stacy was in the kitchen, making dinner. The twins were at the table, coloring with the expensive markers someone on his staff had bought them. It was painfully domestic, painfully normal. Stacy looked up when he walked in. "You're late. I had a meeting." "With?" "Someone who needed information." Her eyes searched his face. "What kind of information?" "The kind that burns bridges." Stacy set down the knife she'd been using. "What did you do?" "I gave away my leverage," Min Jae said simply. "Every connection, every operation, every piece of insurance I had. I gave it to someone who'll use it to dismantle my competitors." "Why?" "Because as long as I'm a ghost, we're targets. But if I make enough noise destroying everyone else, maybe they'll be too busy to come for us." Stacy stared at him. "You just started a war." "No," Min Jae said. "I just ended one. By sacrificing everything you've built. By protecting everything that matters." The silence stretched between them. "You're insane," Stacy said finally. "Probably. You just made yourself the most hated man in the network." "I know. They'll come for you. Let them." Stacy shook her head. But there was something in her eyes that wasn't quite anger and wasn't quite fear. It was something softer, something that looked almost like respect. "You really meant it," she said quietly, "when you said you'd let me go." "Yes. You're burning down your empire so we can be safe." "Yes. And what happens when there's nothing left to burn?" Min Jae looked at her, at this woman who'd seen through him, seen past him, and somehow still stood in his kitchen making dinner while his children colored at the table and told her the truth. Then I figure out who I am without it, he said. And maybe that's the point. 6 months later, the house wasn't glass anymore. It was cedar and brick and something that smelled like sawdust and possibility. A Victorian restoration project on the outskirts of the city, close enough to hear the ocean on quiet nights, but far enough from the water to feel rooted to the earth. The bones had been good. Stacy had known that the moment she'd walked through the door and felt the weight of 100 years of history in the floorboards. Min Jae funded it. Stacy designed it. And slowly, room by room, beam by beam, they built something that felt less like a fortress and more like a foundation. The twins were 3 now, their sentences growing longer and more complex with each passing day. Mara had stopped calling Min Jae monster most of the time now. It was daddy, or sometimes just Min, which she'd picked up from hearing Stacy say his name. Clara had stopped crying when her mother left the room, and Stacy had stopped checking exits like she was cataloging escape routes. The network had fractured exactly as Min Jae predicted. His information had detonated through the underworld like a controlled demolition, taking down operations and triggering investigations that would ripple for years. Some of his former competitors disappeared. Some went to prison. A few tried to come for him, but they found something they didn't expect. Min Jae wasn't hiding anymore. He'd learned to be visible, not as the glazier, not as the ghost, just as a man who'd made choices and was willing to stand in the light they cast. Detective Park still watched him, but she watched from a distance, waiting for him to slip, and he never did. Because he'd learned something crucial in those 6 months. You can't be hunted if you're not running. On a Saturday morning in late spring, when the garden smelled like rain and fresh-cut grass, Stacy found Min Jae on the back porch. He was sitting on the steps that were still unpainted, watching Mara and Clara in the yard. They'd turned the space beneath the old oak tree into what they called their castle, a structure built from sticks and imagination, and the kind of architectural logic only children possess. Stacy sat beside him, close enough that her shoulder pressed against his. She was barefoot, her jeans rolled up, dirt under her fingernails from the morning's work on the garden beds. She smelled like soil and coffee and something that was just her. "They're destroying your landscaping," she said. "It's their landscaping," Min Jae corrected. "I just paid for it." "I know. It's unsettling. I'm aware." They sat in silence for a while, watching the twins. Mara was explaining something to Clara with the seriousness of a child who believed dirt castles were architecture. Clara was listening with the patience of a child who would follow her sister anywhere. "I talked to my lawyer yesterday," Stacy said finally. Min Jae went still, but he didn't look at her, just kept watching the twins. About the custody paperwork, the birth certificates. "I want to add your name." The air changed. Min Jae felt it shift, like pressure before a storm. "You don't have to," he said carefully. "I know, but I want to. Not because I'm ready to trust you completely. Not because I think we're fixed, but because they deserve to know who their father is. Legally, officially, not just in middle names and fairy tales. Stacy, let me finish." She turned to look at him, and the morning light caught in her eyes, turning them gold at the edges. "I also told him I want joint custody, 50-50, but with conditions." "What conditions?" "That we live close enough for them to go back and forth without it feeling like displacement. That you don't make decisions about their lives without talking to me first. That you remember they're ours, not yours. That possession isn't the same as protection." "Ours," Min Jae repeated, testing the word the way Mara had tested ocean months ago. "Yes, ours. Is that something you can live with?" Min Jae looked at her, at this woman who'd left him, weaponized him, and somehow taught him what it meant to be worthy of staying and let himself hope. "Yes," he said. "I can live with that." "Good." Stacy stood, brushing dirt from her jeans. "Because there's something else I need you to know." "What?" "I'm not staying because I have to," she said, and her voice carried the weight of every choice she'd made to get here. "I'm staying because I'm choosing to. Because I see you trying. Because I think maybe we can build something real if we're both willing to do the work. But if that ever changes, if I ever start to feel like I'm disappearing again, I will leave. And you'll let me." "I will," Min Jae promised, and he meant it with everything he had. "Even if it hurts?" "Especially if it hurts." Stacy studied his face, searching for the lie, the crack, the place where the old Min Jae might still be hiding. But she didn't find it. "You really did change," she said. "I'm still changing. Changing is enough." She held out her hand, and when he took it, the calluses on her palm pressed against his. "For now, They stood there on the unpainted steps of a house still becoming itself, watching their daughters build castles from sticks and dreams, and for the first time in 2 years, neither of them was running. That night, after the twins were asleep and the house had settled into quiet, Stacy and Min-jae sat on the porch, watching the stars. "Do you ever miss it?" Stacy asked. "The old life, the power, the control." "Sometimes," Min-jae admitted. "But then I think about what I traded it for, and the missing stops." "What did you trade it for?" He looked at her. "The chance to be someone you didn't have to run from." Stacy's breath caught. "I read something once," Min-jae continued. A quote from a psychologist named Carl Rogers. He said, "The curious paradox is that when I accept myself just as I am, then I can change." He paused, letting the words settle between them. "I spent my whole life trying to be invulnerable, trying to be perfect, trying to build walls high enough that nothing could hurt me, and all I did was trap myself. It wasn't until I accepted that I was broken, that I had hurt you, that I had failed, that I could actually start to fix it." Stacy was quiet for a long moment. "That's the first time you've ever quoted something at me," she said. "Is it working?" "Maybe." They sat in silence, and then Stacy said, "There's a Yoruba proverb. However far the stream flows, it never forgets its source. I used to think that meant you can't escape where you came from, but I think it means something else now." "What?" "That you can keep moving forward and still honor what made you. You don't have to be the glazier anymore, Min-jae, but you also don't have to pretend he never existed. He's your source, just not your destination." Min-jae nodded, something in his chest loosening. "The foundation is settling," Stacy said, echoing the line from her fairy tale. Min-jae looked at her, at this woman who'd run from him, fought him, and somehow taught him what it meant to be loved without being owned, and finished the line. "Then we build." In the distance, they could hear Mara humming, the same lullaby, the same melody that had started everything, but this time, it didn't sound like an ending. It sounded like a beginning. "If you've made it this far, I want to ask you something. Have you ever had to choose between the safety of what you know and the risk of what you could become? Between the fortress that protects you and the freedom that exposes you?" Stacy and Min-jae's story isn't about perfect love or easy answers. It's about two people who had to break themselves open to build something real. And sometimes, that's the hardest foundation to lay. If this story made you feel something, if it reminded you that change is possible, even when it's painful, I invite you to stay with us at Velvet Noir. We tell stories about love that costs something, about people who are beautifully, devastatingly human, about the kind of second chances that don't come easy but are worth everything. Like this video if you believe in the power of transformation. Share it with someone who needs to hear that it's never too late to rebuild. And subscribe to Velvet Noir, because every story we tell is an invitation to stay inside this world with us. This is Velvet Noir, signing off. We'll see you in the next shadow.